Well, it isn't obvious to me that I'm in any position to evaluate Elon Musk. Like, I would like to talk to him and find out what he's up to and why, but I mean, he's an impossible person. What he's done is impossible. All of it. It's like he built an electric car that works. Now, does it work completely and will it replace gas cars, or should it? I don't know. But if we're going to build electric cars, he seems to be the best at that by a lot. And he more or less did that. People carp about him, but he more or less did that by himself. I know he's very good at distributing responsibility and all of that, but he's the spearhead. And then that was pretty hard. And then he built a rocket at like 1/10 the price of NASA rockets. And then he shot his car out into space. That's pretty hard. And then he's building this boring company, more or less as a, what would you call it? It's this whimsical joke in some sense, but it's not a joke. He's amazing.
And Neuralink, delving into the depths of the mind.
And Starlink, it's like, go Elon, as far as I'm concerned.
My big problem with the lobsters is that it's scientifically bollocks, right? It's just, you cannot read across from lobsters and what they do to what humans do.
Of course you can. That's why serotonin works on lobsters.
But it works in two different ways. So serotonin makes lobsters more aggressive, it makes humans less aggressive, right? That's what happens.
No, that's not right. Serotonin makes human beings more dominant but less aggressive. And the only reason it makes them more dominant is because they're less irritable and they're less defensive and aggressive. So it's not bollocks. I know my neurochemistry. So if you're going to play neurochemistry, let's go and do it.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and... I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me.
For example, if a black guy said, hey, I'm black, you can just say, no, you're not, and then can you use racial epithets or what he considers racial epithets? Because people in the trans community...
Can I? Of course I can. Whether I should or not is a different issue, and whether or not it should be illegal is a completely different issue. So whether I can and whether I should are not the same thing. No, it's not.
If a black guy to call him the N-word, it would be illegal.
It's not illegal.
Harassment. It's harassment. If you continually do it,
it's not illegal. It's not illegal in the United States.
Oh, okay. I agree to disagree on that one because
there's no disagreeing about it. It's not illegal.
Yeah, well, go see how that works if you go on down to Spanish Harlem. But just be sure to upload it with a GoPro.
I didn't say that you should do it, and I didn't say that it was right, but I did say that it was legal.
How does this war end, do you think?
We're going to find out this winter. Well, I know what I would do in his shoes. I'd wait till the first cold snap and shut off the taps.
Right.
Well, because of course he's going to do that.
He's got the control over the energy.
Of course he's going to do that. He's already warned the West with his insistence that maintenance problems were necessary and the pipelines had to be shut down.
Do you think he will use a nuclear weapon?
If necessary, he'll use a tactical battlefield weapon.
Even if it starts World War III?
It won't. Probably.
Why? Because we wouldn't respond?
What's in it for us?
If you let him do it and get away with it, where does that end? Then you are into a hit analogy.
Look, you can get yourself in a situation, no problem, where there's no good outcome. We're trying to do that right now on every front we can possibly imagine. We can easily get ourselves in a situation where it's hell this way and hell that way. And people have no historical memory, like my students. And that's partly because they're taught so badly in schools, is they have no idea what happened in the Soviet Union. They have absolutely no idea. They know a little bit about the Second World War, maybe. And of course, people generally know about the Holocaust, but they have no idea what happened in the Soviet Union. So they have no idea where these ideas could lead. And the universities and the high schools are so full of people who are radically left-leaning that the students are never taught any proper history. You know, they're taught about the evils of capitalism. And you know, I mean, it's not like any system is perfect, but there's difference between imperfect and consciously murderous.
What is the antidote towards toxic masculinity?
What precisely is toxic masculinity, as opposed to, say, toxic femininity?
The moment when you go over a boundary that kind of neglects the freedom of the opposite, gender or whatsoever. So
But that would also be toxic femininity. And so part of what's happened in our discourse is that we're required ethically to assume a priori, merely out of politeness, that the utterance toxic masculinity actually constitutes a meaningful phrase. And if you push it, you find very rapidly that it doesn't, because it's very, very, very difficult to define, and definitions actually matter. And so if it's a matter of transgressing against the boundaries of gender-appropriate behavior, it's just as likely to happen among women as among men, in which case it's not toxic masculinity. So I've thought too that love in some sense is the grace of God, is that if you're in a relationship with someone that's characterized by love, you see each other in some deep sense, and you can't see other people like that because you don't have the ability. But it's not like the love is a delusion. It's the opposite of a delusion.
Exactly, and that's the interesting thing. What they're robbing people of is the most beautiful thing, which is the ability to emote for somebody else, and to invest yourself in something.
Well, and also to live in that condition. I mean, if you're around someone that you love, and that love defines the relationship, there isn't any better thing you can do.
No.
And so then to minimize that, to call it some sort of biological or biochemical aberration, which is the worst form of unconscionable reductionism, is to reduce the highest possible goal to something that's nothing but like a trivial consequence of some underlying materiality. It's appalling, and it's really demoralizing.
I've got to wrap it up. I don't want to, but I have to. I want to ask you just quickly, the film director Olivia Wilde has a new movie out, which she says is based on you, this insane man, this pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community. Incel being these weirdo loner men who are despicable in many ways. Is that you? Are you the intellectual hero to these people?
Sure, why not? People have been after me for a long time because I've been speaking to disaffected young men. Now, what a terrible thing to do that is. Thought the marginalized were supposed to have a voice.
Making you emotional. Talk about that.
Well, God, it's very difficult to understand how demoralized people are. And certainly many young men are in that category. So here's what you should have done if you were a Nazi and you wanted to win the war. You should have enslaved the Jews and the Gypsies and had them work, right? You should have had them work for the benefit of the victory. And then if you wanted to, you liquidate them afterwards. That's the logical thing to do if you want to win. And we assume that Hitler wanted to win. But that's not a very intelligent assumption. Why would you assume that? He wasn't exactly a good guy. So why should we assume that he was aiming at the good that he was promoting, even in his own terms? You certainly don't devote a substantial proportion of your war resources while you're losing to accelerate the rate at which the extermination is taking place, because that's a bit counterproductive, unless what you're aiming at is the maximum possible mayhem in the shortest period of time. If you can't figure out what someone is doing or why, look at the outcome and infer the motivation. If it produces mayhem, perhaps it was aiming at mayhem. And so I've always thought, when I hear the Marxist types claim that, real Marxism has never been tried, that they think narcissistically something along the following lines, which is, well, Stalin didn't do a very good job, and Lenin didn't do a very good job, and neither did Mao, and neither did Pol Pot. And those are quite a few different cultures and situations, boys and girls. But if I would have been the tyrant in charge then, with all my wisdom and my deep knowledge of Marxist doctrine, then the socialist utopia certainly would have come to fruition. And you might say, well, when has that actually worked successfully and not resulted in absolute economic catastrophe and mass murder? And the answer is, well, pretty much never. And then you say, well, doesn't that constitute evidence to invalidate your claim? And they say, well, really, you can convert kids surgically. So tell me how we can be having this conversation even. It's just beyond comprehension.
Yeah, it's. I think people have very differing views. A lot of people just want to tolerate it and say this is fine.
Tolerate what? Tolerate what? Castration and double mastectomies for 13-year-olds?
Well, yeah,
no, seriously,
man.
Yeah. That's not tolerance. That's crossed the line. That is not tolerance. That is an inexcusable silence on the part of the majority, the vast majority, who knows this to be wrong in the deepest possible sense. Most of the bloody Nazi propaganda that led to the extermination policies at the beginning of World War II were predicated initially on compassion and tolerance. So this whole, we're being compassionate and tolerant, it's like, no, you're not.
No, but you might
This
equally...
is a trope that people just accept. Western society is a male-dominated patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. That's not true. And even if it has a patriarchal structure to some degree, the fundamental basis of that structure is not power, it's competence. That's why our society works. It's only when a structure degenerates into tyranny that the fundamental relationships between people become dependent on power. It's not power. If you hire a plumber who's likely to be male, it's not because there's roving bands of tyrannical plumbers forcing you to make that choice. This whole patriarchy thing, I think you have no idea how pernicious and dangerous it is.
You've talked a lot in defense of traditional hierarchies, both of gender, of class, so on, though emphatically not of race. And so it seems that...
I haven't talked about defense of traditional hierarchies in terms of gender and class. That's not true.
Well, you've talked about hierarchies in society. You've talked
about... Yeah, that's
yes.
true. I have done that. But I haven't justified them on the basis of gender and class. Whatever categories.
You talk
not
about,
okay. That's an important distinction.
Okay, but you defend hierarchies in society in a way that... You talk a lot about the Pareto distribution, yes?
That doesn't mean I defend it.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think you talk
Observing that something exists is not the same as defending it.
Maybe you just think that women should be equally represented in the decision-making fora of our nation. Maybe that's really just about having proper equality in a body that's meant to be representative.
Well, I do believe that women should have... I don't understand your question, I guess.
I guess you don't. That's pretty obvious, unfortunately.
Well, how about if you phrase it more clearly, instead of just insulting me? 99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels? Why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board? Yeah, but that's because it's power. I figured out very early that if I had a meeting at a university at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'd never have a protester in sight. Because none of them had the bloody discipline to stick to their principles, what would you say, assiduousness, so that they would sacrifice their late night drinking session the night before so they wouldn't be too hungover and bleary-eyed to come out and confront the evil professor who is going to go out there and warp their compatriots. And so the fact that I could circumvent the bloody activists by merely showing up early in the morning is a pretty fundamental indictment of the fundamental maturity of their motivation, and also something that's blackly comical in the deepest possible sense. And the fact that these idiot professors on these left-wing campuses take the messianic delusions of these overgrown adolescents with some degree of seriousness, overlay that with compassion, and then invite them to become useless activists and thereby fulfill the moral demands that their own conscience puts on them is an unbelievably deep indication of the absolute moral bankruptcy of the modern university.